Food is fuel for your body, your mind, and definitely your sport. But let's face it, nutrition is confusing, and the expectations on girls and women to be thin and have a six-pack are exhausting. If you've ever been frustrated with your body, confused about nutrition, obsessed with eating healthy, or guilty when you don't, underate, overate, or overtrained, and overwhelmed with all the pressure, then this podcast is for you. Nutrition can be easy. You can take control of it, but it might start with letting go of control by asking for help and making a change. I'm Lindsay Elizabeth Cortez, sports dietitian and owner of Rise Up Nutrition, where I empower female athletes to overcome nutrition concerns and perform at their highest level, to stop being confused by all the mixed or harmful messages, and finally have confidence in your body as a fierce, fit, and fueled female athlete. All right, fans, we've got another great episode of the Female Athlete Nutrition Podcast with Dr. Shona Halson. She is an associate professor at the School of Behavioral and Health Sciences at the Australian Catholic University. Previously, Shona was a senior physiologist at the Australian Institute of Sport for 15 years. She has a PhD in exercise physiology and has over 100 peer-reviewed publications in the areas of sleep, recovery, fatigue, and travel. Shona is an associate editor of the International Journal of Sports Physiology and Performance, and she was selected as a director of the Australian Olympic Committee's Recovery Centre for the 2008, 2012, and 2016 Olympic Games. Shona consults regularly to world's leading brands, including Nike and the Australian Open tennis tournament, and I think she's going to guide us in a really eye-opening conversation about recovery and the importance of that for athletes and exercisers of all levels. So Dr. Shona Halson, thanks so much for joining us today.
No, thanks, Lindsay. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I think you're quite the expert in this field. And it's interesting from my perspective as a dietitian that I've always valued, nutrition for recovery, but I've noticed myself in a lot of my conversations recently that this is like the focus of my conversations about, nutrition really, when it comes to being an athlete, it's like how we fuel our body dictates how well we recover and how well that workout was even worth it. So I'm super excited to dig into all of this with you.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. And certainly you're right. Recovery is one of those sort of hot topics at the moment. We sort of went through one of those phases where it was, train, and no pain, no gain. And then we started throwing in lots of recovery strategies. And now I think we're getting a little bit more nuanced in how we use recovery and how we periodize it and plan it. So I think as we go along, we've been sort of learning a little bit more about not just how important it is, but then what do we do with it when we've got access to recovery and how do we sort of plan it into our schedules.
Oh, and I already love how you just said plan it into your schedule. You have to plan recovery into your schedule.
Yeah, you certainly do. And I think that's where it works best, working with athletes who've got a training program. And I think if they don't see that recovery is sort of planned in there, they don't see it as important. They see the training and they think that that's what it's all about. Obviously, we know that you've got to train, but if you can prioritize some recovery as well and show that it's important to the athletes and have it scheduled in so they don't skip it, then I think that's when you get the best of both the training and the recoveries to balance out well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I have so many questions that are already going through my head right now, but I want to backtrack for a moment. Just as an exercise physiologist, you certainly have you have a lot of work concentrating on like recovery and sleep, but I'd love to know a little bit about your backstory, how you got into exercise physiology and how did recovery become such a hot topic for you in your career?
Yeah, well, I always wanted to actually be a physical education teacher. My dad was a PE teacher, so I always thought, that's what I wanted to do. But then as I sort of went through high school, I got really interested in actually sports psychology. And I started out studying psychology and then kind of went, I'm not sure this is for me. And then went into exercise physiology. I was fascinated by the science and the biology and the physiology. And so then I started, some of my early research was actually in chronic fatigue syndrome and exercise and people experiencing excessive fatigue, which then got me interested in working with athletes. And so my PhD was actually in overtraining. So really took that kind of fatigue angle. And then sort of got to the point where I was like, wow, fatigue is complicated and we don't really understand it. And there's so many things going on that maybe if we just explore recovery, that might be a good angle. And then really fortunately, just as I was finishing my PhD, there was a job advertised at the Australian Institute of Sport and the title was Fatigue and Recovery Scientist. And I was like, wow, if there was ever a job for me, this is it. I was fortunate enough to get it, but it was really funny that I probably had more knowledge on the fatigue side than the recovery side, but the job really was and continued to be about recovery and how we help our athletes recover, not just from, there was a lot of practical work, so directly working with athletes, but also research. So, like a lot of countries, Australia is really evidence-based. So we, what are these people doing jumping in ice baths? Like, this is mad. How about we do some science and try to understand, does it work, does it not work, when should we do it? So there was a really strong focus on that job of both the research and the service provision with athletes. So it was, the perfect job at the perfect opportunity at the perfect time. So it was great.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so cool. I can see the transition and how it all kind of like morphed and everything.
Yeah, it came together.
Yeah. And it's interesting, that chronic fatigue syndrome is such a complex and interesting thing to study and dive into. Confusing, difficult.
Oh, totally. And I think that was one of the things that why I was interested in it was that we just don't understand this. And maybe, when young naive student, maybe I can answer all the questions. And I was like, no, I think I just resulted in more questions being asked. But I love fascinating areas like that we just don't really know much about and try to add a bit of science to it. But I certainly didn't do that in the chronic fatigue space.
Yeah. Well, you've got a lot of answers now in the recovery space. And I thought to kick us off too, I think it'd be great if you could give us a quick explanation of like the definition of recovery. I think everybody can understand like that it's important, but do you have more of like a good definition and how we can understand really what's happening from a physiological level in the body when we use the word recovery and stress the importance of it?
Yeah, it's such a good question because I think recovery means different things to different people depending on when you're talking about it and what you're talking about. So as an example, one of the first things I did when I started at the Institute of Sport was I had to design a recovery centre, like with some architects, and we thought we were going to put in it. So we travelled around everywhere asking people about what they do for recovery. And the question I got back was recovering from what injury? And so there wasn't kind of this idea really concrete that we actually need to recover just from training and competition. And so for me, the definition or the way that I think about recovery is bringing the body back to homeostasis or bringing it back to balance. So we know that training competition is stressful both from a physical and from a psychological angle. So for me, recovery is, you've stressed the body, you've done some damage, you've got some fatigue. Recovery is about bringing you back to the as close as we can to the level that you are at. Now, sometimes you don't want to get back to the level you're at. Fatigue's not a bad thing. Sometimes you want to get higher. But the idea for me is to try to bring you back physically and psychologically back to balance.
Yeah, I think that's such a good way of thinking about it. And I apologize, but not really. My brain's always thinking about it in nutrition terms.
Yes,
and like,
of course.
So as you're talking, I'm thinking about it and I'm like, yeah, something I'm always saying to my clients over and over again is that exercise and training is a process of breaking you down, right? It's a process of breaking you down, breaking your body down. And so when I'm talking to them about the importance of fueling for recovery, it's to get you back up, to from an energy standpoint, maybe, you went into a catabolic state, you lost energy. And now from a nutrition standpoint, you need to regain your energy. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you are now eating everything you need for your life and your day. It just means that you made up for that process of what you lost. And so I like that definition you just explained of coming back to homeostasis. But you kind of expanded on that a little bit further already of, well, maybe sometimes you don't just want to come back to homeostasis. You might want to, improve, right? And I guess that's what training adaptation is all about.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's as I was sort of talking about earlier, I mentioned, this idea of it was all about the training and it was all about the breakdown. And then I think, we know now that elite athletes can train harder, and we're monitoring them better, and we're pushing them to limits that they never have been really pushed to before in a lot of instances. So making sure we've got that balance with recovery in there can help, theoretically help improve that adaptation and sort of increase, performance over time. But we also think about, and I'm sure you think about this from a nutrition perspective as well, that there are times when it's kind of okay, or you may want to drive some adaptation by not being in that perfectly recovered state, because there are good things that happen there as well. We just have to time it as to when, the classic one, for an example, might be around ice baths. And there are times when, in a competition block, if you're a rower racing every day, 2 times a day at Olympics, then, maybe, that's when we want to have a lot of recovery strategies for you, and ice baths regularly may be a great thing. But there may be other times when, you're trying to build up some adaptation and drive some fatigue that we may take it away a little bit. So like you periodize nutrition, we think now around periodizing recovery and putting things in at the right times.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if this is a simple answer, but I'm going to ask the question. Is there a way to figure out what those best times are to maximize? What you were just saying, I would extract from that, when it's competition season and you need peak performance, that's the time to use recovery modalities to maximize full recovery, full come back to homeostasis, versus preseason training, kind of building up whatever your sport is, but your building phase is where you might allow some fatigue for your body to adapt and overcome. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. You've nailed it. And that idea, for some sports may have a very short preseason. And so they end up doing a lot of recovery, like some of the professional team sports that play for a significant number of games, of weeks per year. They're essentially playing all year round. You look at the NBA, baseball, NBA, they're playing all the time. So when you talk about periodizing recovery for them, it's probably not really such a big deal, because they're playing every week, multiple times per week potentially, and so you want them to be as good as they can. Every game counts. But then you might be working with a swimmer who's got one important race every year, or every 4 years, but when they're 5 years in the last instance, where Olympic Games, where it's like this is what they really care about. And so there may be periods of time where they're really just training and not racing much, and you look at some of these Olympic athletes, they're just tired all the time. It's just life. And so sometimes there may be periods in their pre-season block, or where they're essentially, building some endurance capacity, or they're just doing lots of long, hard, slow Ks, and, they're trying to build up their fitness, where you might take away a little bit of recovery. But one of the things I also think is important to consider is there's probably, so if we think of an example, say track cyclist, where they do lots of long Ks on the road when they're building up their endurance, then they start to get on the track and they're doing more sort of short, sharp, high intensity efforts. Then they get into their competition block. So we go, okay, competition block, yes, every recovery strategy that you can. Endurance, build-up phase, maybe not as much, but then also thinking when they're in this high-intensity training phase that maybe we can use recovery to help prepare them for quality sessions. So just say they've done a really hard session in the gym in the morning, and then coach wants them to do really high-quality, sharp sessions in the afternoon. Maybe recovery there is really the aim is to prepare them for what they're doing next, more so than typically helping them recover from what they've just done. They're obviously related, but the goal is really to set them up for the next session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is great. I do work with a lot of collegiate athletes, and so I'm thinking about them right now. I think it's pretty easy to kind of periodize your recovery based on your season, but specifically coming to mind is our track and field and cross country athletes. And I'm throwing in the cross country because they turn into 3-sport athletes with fall season cross country, winter indoor track, and then spring outdoor track. And that's turning into needing recovery all the time. That's, all the time, versus if we do have a track athlete that's, specific to just track. Now we've got 2 seasons, and that's a little, you've got that longer preseason. Yeah, I was just thinking about that sport in particular. And then I'm thinking about some of my other clients. I work with some obstacle course racers, and they don't seem to have an off season.
No.
at all.
No.
So every sport is different. You really have to look ahead at your season. And I think this is important, when you are on a high level or a collegiate team, hopefully you have a coach doing that. But there's so many recreational exercisers, and I don't say that lightly, recreationally competitive exercisers, high school athletes that, are just pushing all the time and maybe don't have that guidance from a coach or a strict schedule. And I think sometimes recreational athletes get themselves in more troubles with under recovery because they don't create these seasons and they need to.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think when you're recreational, you may have additional, whether it's school, whether it's work, and you're trying to fit in some of your training at odd hours of the day. So, I just even think about me and when I can fit in exercise. And for me, really the only time is early in the morning. And so then you end up going, oh, well, I'm sacrificing a bit of sleep and you're trying to do this balance and then you're trying to work. And so, yes, the elite athletes, would be training harder than me for sure. But then there's potentially options for them to sleep during the day. They have other stresses and other commitments as well. But I just think we can't disregard how important recovery is and how challenging it can be for them to get with in the recreational space.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to be like a Google search blog post. What are your top tips for recovery? What are your top 5 tips, top 10 tips? I don't know. What are some of these modalities that help recovery?
Yeah, look, I think, I'm always going to start with sleep, and I'm probably a little bit maybe not biased in terms of the science because we know it's there, but I do think it's an area that I work in a lot, and I do just think it's incredibly important. And when I think of recovery, and I talk about this all the time, so people are probably sick of hearing me talk about it, but I think of recovery as a pyramid, and I think of sleep as the base of the pyramid. It's the foundation. So, when I'm talking to some of these pro athletes who are looking at the next latest and greatest gadget that, goes bling and it's shiny and it's fancy and it promotes to do all these things, I'm like, yeah, but you're not sleeping. So for me, the number one thing that people can do is sleep. And it is interesting because we don't talk about periodizing sleep. We don't talk about, people talk about negative effects of ice bath and negative effects of over recovery, but we never talk about, maybe we should not sleep as much. It's like we need it. It's so important. There's so many good things that go on. It's a third of our lives, or should be, and for a reason. So I would always say my number one tip that anyone should be doing, whether you're recreational, whether you're elite, is to really try to optimize and protect sleep as much as possible. I think that's what we don't do. We don't protect it because everything else gets in the way.
I'm in complete agreement. Can I cut you off for just a moment?
You absolutely can.
Because just to myth bust me, so there's no such thing as too much sleep, or there kind of is.
Well, we don't see it very often. We don't. Most of the time, we tend to see people to get less sleep than they should. So to see people get more is rare. But sometimes when people are sleeping really, long hours, it may be that there's something underlying medically going on. It may be that they're ill. It also could be that we see a lot of people with, depression, for example, escaping the world by sleeping longer than they probably need to. So that's rare, but it does happen. But generally speaking, what we see is people sleeping less than they should.
Yeah. So if we're ruling out, medical concerns, and you're an athlete and you're, saying I must be fine, I've had 7 hours of sleep, 8 hours, it's like, oh, you could actually need 9 or 9.5, and that's not too much.
Yes. And I think the idea is that, we talk about 8 to 9 hours for the normal person. So we're probably thinking, more like at least 9, maybe even 10 for a high level athlete or someone who's doing a lot of training. Now, that's really hard to achieve, and not many people do. And it's variable. Like some people might need a lot less sleep than others. But I think as a general rule, most people could probably sleep about an hour and a half more than they are probably getting.
Yeah. And I think here in the US, I don't have the recent statistics, but I think we have some of the worst sleep across the globe, 5-6 hours per average American per night. And that's pretty sad. So
yeah, it is. And I think that the thing now is that we also know that, how important sleep is for, okay, so if you take away the athlete aspect and we just think about general health and well-being, physical health, mental health, cardiovascular health, obesity, diabetes, like you can link sleep deprivation and has been linked scientifically to pretty much everything. So it is one of those things that, if I was to say, my number one tip would absolutely be let's try and work on our sleep as much as possible.
Yeah, I agree. As a quick side note too, my husband, who is in the US military, he goes through periods of his life where there is sleep deprivation, whether it's intentionally, it's just the nature of the job. And as an intimate viewer of that, it is crazy to see how fast things go downhill. And of course, he'll never admit this, so hopefully he doesn't listen to this episode. But he it is just viewing it. It's like, wow, everything just crumbles. Everything crumbles.
You're right. Everything does. Mood in particular, I think is one of the first things that goes. And then it just becomes dangerous. If you're driving a car or you're operating machinery, you probably notice the mood things, but that's one of the things. But then, reaction time and, safety, and then you get into long-term health. And I think the thing to understand is we all know that there's going to be periods where we're not sleeping well. It may be stress, it may be job related. There will be periods where we don't sleep well. And for the majority of time, it's not the end of the world, but it's when we do this and we have consistent sleep deprivation for really long periods of time, that's the concern. And I think one of the things that I always try to balance up is we don't want people to get so perfectionistic and stressed about their sleep that they start to sleep bad. So they go, oh, wow, I heard this podcast and, sleep's really important. And then they get one bad night's sleep and everything just goes bad. So I think this idea of, no one sleeps perfectly all the time. Having bad nights here and there is totally okay. But what we don't want to do is have long-term, persistent, chronic sleep deprivation, because that's just absolutely not good for anyone.
And now I saw somewhere recently, you can fact check this for me, that there's a term now for that obsession with sleep tracking that actually hurts your sleep. I see it it's draws such a parallel to in the nutrition field of orthorexia, of people's concern for being healthy, that they actually end up harming themselves, their body, physically, mentally. What is that term in regards to sleep?
Yeah, it's orthosomnia.
Orthosomnia.
Yeah, so very similar as you mentioned to the nutrition world. And yeah, it is this idea that, we can be so perfectionistic about our sleep. We can, for some people, monitoring their sleep is not a great idea. For some people it is, for some people it isn't. It may depend on how you monitor it and what you use. But it's this idea that you can become obsessed and so perfectionistic about it that actually causes, you probably didn't have a sleep problem before, but now you do, because you're monitoring and you're paying too much attention, you're getting perfectionistic about it. And one of the things that we know is incredibly bad for sleep is stress and anxiety. And what you don't want is your own perfectionism about sleep to cause that stress and anxiety, because then that will actually disturb your sleep. So we do see it occasionally, and it is something that, again, I really try to balance, because it is really easy to get people overly concerned about their sleep. I like to see people kind of flexible about it and go, well, look, I might have a bad night tonight. It's not the end of the world. I'll do better the next night. Or I'll prep a little bit knowing that I'm going to have this block of time where I'm sleeping bad. So I'll try to sleep as good as I can, before you travel or things like that. So I think, just this idea of being flexible around your sleep. It's okay to not sleep perfectly all the time, but let's not get into really long-term bad habits.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great advice. I'm definitely one of those people that tracking my sleep and caring about it too much caused more anxiety. So I have learned to become very, very flexible with it. And that I even say a little mantra to myself, which is what you just said. When there's a night I'm not sleeping and it's very frustrating, I tell myself, well, I guess I'll sleep better tomorrow, and it gives me that hope and something to look forward to. Oh man, I could talk to you about sleep forever, but I'm certainly not going through your. Yeah, well, I asked you for your quick list of top recovery modalities, and we're still on number one. So sleep is number one for sure. What are your other quick recovery?
Nutrition, and I know you're absolutely all over that, but fundamentally agree that nutrition, sometimes I debate what goes on the bottom of the pyramid. Is it sleep? Is it nutrition? Is it sleep and nutrition? But nutrition, absolutely one of the foundations. I also think mental recovery is really important. Now, that may look different to different people in terms of what the modality is. Like, it may be music, it may be meditation, it may be just doing nothing, but making sure we think about options for mental recovery. And then I think there's certainly benefits to things like massage or soft tissue therapy. I think there's benefits of water immersion, whether that's ice baths, contrast baths, hot water immersion. And then there's some benefits of compression as well. And again, whether that's compression garments or the pneumatic compression, so like the recovery pump type devices. So they would kind of be my top ones. Again, I'd spend more time down the bottom of the pyramid with your sleep recovery and mental recovery. And then if you're doing all those well, I start to think about things like massage, compression, and water immersion as good strategies.
That's great. And it also, I feel like not only is that pyramid and that order makes sense in how important they are, but also probably how much time you need to invest in these things. You already dropped that time reference to sleep and saying that a third of our lives should be sleep. And then you think about what's the next thing that takes up a huge focus of our lives or is we need to eat every day, multiple times a day for the rest of our lives. So that takes up time. And then mental recovery, well, you're thinking all day long, you have 80,000 thoughts a day or more. I don't know how they track that number, but you apparently, so it's like you need that, that's a lot of time going into those three things versus, an hour massage once a week or a 20-minute ice bath or, a 30-minute compression every other night. So those are the things that are really cool and trendy and certainly helpful in some situations, but we need to put more effort into those other three things. Yeah,
couldn't agree more. And I find, and maybe it's, I don't know if I'm getting younger or the athletes I'm getting older or the athletes are getting younger. Sorry, I'm definitely not getting younger. is you see this, for a lot of, there's a lot of things that are marketed well, marketed on social media, and there's this attraction to the simple, fast, easy things that that potentially actually don't work, but are marketed really, really well. And the things like, you would know, in the nutrition space, just, good, healthy eating. It's like, well, that's not, exciting and sexy and, that, but sleep, same thing. It's like, why, I'd much rather be doing other things than sleeping. But unfortunately, sometimes it's those things, the foundational things that people need to work on that don't seem like a whole lot of fun and don't seem like they would make a massive difference that actually do make a difference, a big difference.
Yep. I'm saying that all the time too. When I'm talking to clients, I'm like, I know it's not sexy, but I'm not going to prescribe you this cool new supplement. I'm going to tell you about this thing called carbohydrates.
That's right. Exactly. That's probably really safe and really effective. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really effective. Hey fans, I hope you are enjoying this conversation so far, and we'll be back to it in just a moment. But first, I want to pause and let you know that this episode is brought to you by the Female Athlete System of Transformation, aka the Fast Track to overcome disordered eating and use food as fuel to perform at your highest level. The Female Athlete System of Transformation is my unique program and proven systems to guide female athletes to understanding and implementing the proper nutrition for their sport, life, and health. Myself and my team of registered sports dietitians work one-on-one with clients to address their unique needs and counsel them through the nutritional and behavioral changes needed. Many female athletes who resonate with disordered eating, mental guilt around food and body, relative energy deficiency in sport or female athlete triad, amenorrhea, repeat injuries due to negligent nutrition, or frankly, just a lack of knowledge and understanding on their fueling needs, have seen incredible success in the Fast Track. After years of working as a sports RD, I've compiled the most effective ways for female athletes to learn nutrition, be supported, be challenged, and ultimately find their success with fueling as fast as possible. So don't wait another day. Get to your goals faster by joining the Female Athlete System of Transformation. Look in the show notes or head to the website to book a free call and learn more. Okay, Now let's get you back to the conversation. Enjoy. So I thought we could quickly, I just have some like random questions with these recovery modalities. Like already in this conversation, you've mentioned ice baths a couple of times. And I think you kind of cracked a joke at like people do an ice bath every day. That's not good. So yeah, when I was a college athlete, I jumped in the ice bath every day because I was sore all the time. And it felt good. So what's the background on that? Like, is it kind of what you were saying before, if it's just about periodization of your recovery, or, why do an ice bath? How often, and what is it good for? What could it not be good for?
Yeah. So I think ice baths are one of those things that for some reason people started doing, like in terms of from the recovery space, a lot of things that athletes do stem from the medical world. So, okay, if it works for sick and injured people, maybe it'll work for me to speed up my recovery. Compression garments is one of the classics that sort of came from that world. And ice baths is a little bit has come from that perspective as well, that, you're like you'd ice an injury. Well, maybe if I put my whole body in, that this is going to help. And we, as I mentioned earlier, I started at the Institute of Sport kind of with the idea of I'm going to prove that this is like the most ridiculous thing that people has ever been doing. There's no science on this. Why are the athletes jumping in this cold water baths? And then started finding, hang on, this is actually working. And we were seeing some pretty positive findings in our athletes, and other people have as well. And so ice baths essentially work for a couple of ways. They certainly drop temperature, which can be effective in speeding up the recovery process. So, the body doesn't like really high core temperatures because obviously it's not safe. And so then to speed up recovery, if you can cool your body down a bit, that's a good thing. There's a lot of hydrostatic pressure in water. So if you're 6 foot tall, standing up in water covering your shoulders, then there's probably about 5 times the amount of compression against the lower limb that you'd see as to wearing compression garments. So, for example, compression garments are probably about 20 meters of mercury pressure. You can see up to about 150 millimeters of mercury pressure when you're standing in water. So there's a lot of hydrostatic pressure, which is excellent for blood flow and redistribution of blood flow, etc. So they're the 2 primary mechanisms. We also know, though, there's something about being in water when you're really hot. That's just really nice. Now, whether that's, very low temperatures or not, but people cooling down and being in water environment there's something psychologically nice about that. And there's some evidence that there's some changes in the brain that might happen as well to make you feel good. So there is some support there for the idea that ice baths are good. Contrast baths, so going from the hot to the cold, we know a little bit less about, but that's actually the thing that I see athletes do the most. If you've got a facility that has hot and cold and you let athletes do whatever they want, it'll usually be either just the hot on its own, because it's like a spa, which is fun, or they'll do the contrast. And except if in conditions where it's really, really, really hot, they might avoid the hot water immersion completely and just go the ice bath. But I see a lot of people do the contrast and they really like it. So I think, again, and the contrast is this idea of, again, this redistribution of blood flow. So when you're in cold water, all the blood flow goes to your core to protect the vital organs. And then when you get out or you hop in hot water, there's this redistribution of flow to the periphery. So it's that changing of temperature that might influence blood flow. So we've kind of got, cold and contrast being quite good. We're now starting to understand a little bit more about how hot water can be used, more like a passive heat stress in the recovery period, as potentially driving adaptation as well. But so for me, I would typically think that we normally would target our recovery strategies around, 2 to 3 sessions per week if you're in a hard training block. I think that's probably enough. I don't think you need to do water immersion after every session. And if you're a football player or you've got a competition where you've got some muscle damage, you might want to do recovery after the game. So 2 to 3 to maybe 4 times a week, I think, is the maximum, and loaded more towards competition and maybe taken away a little bit around the pre-season. When you might still do one or 2 recovery, water immersion sessions in the pre-season, but you sort of loaded more towards when you're competing.
Okay. So I can look back to my college career and see where I went wrong. Jumping in the ice bath every day.
And well, look, it's funny in that, we do have some good science now around sort of how ice baths work and that they do work, but we have a lot less information about the timing of doing recovery and how often it should happen. We're really just at that point where we're trying to balance out this idea of too much recovery and not enough recovery. And if I'm working with experienced athletes that say to me, like, I work down at the Australian Open tennis and there's, some famous names that come in there, that absolute advocates of the ice baths, and they are in there every day. And I'm like, okay, you're the best in the world. I think you can probably, know what you're doing. Yeah. And then there's other people who are also really good who don't like it. So I think we're at that point where, if you've got experienced athletes that know what they're doing, I like to let them have some choice and not just prescribe them to within an inch of their lives of what they're doing. So a little bit of freedom and flexibility is always nice.
Well, this is a good guideline for people who are just getting into it or want to get into it with the water immersions of 2 to 3 sessions a week, more based around when you're going for peak performance and stuff like that. Now, what about with things like foam rolling? Is that okay from an everyday perspective? That's what I've been hearing.
Yeah, it's funny. Foam rolling is one of those things that everyone at first was like, this is great, and then there's some science going not so great, and now there's some science saying great. So I think it's leading more towards that it's something that's effective, especially if you don't have access to your own, massage therapist or physiotherapist or something like that who can actually treat you, and you're left to your own devices. It's certainly, and it's something that I actually like doing. I actually feel like it's helping with some of my soreness. I think there's some therapists that don't like it if it takes the place of their work, which you would not want it to do. If you can regularly access, if you're a decent athlete, you can regularly access a physiotherapist or a therapist of some kind, and instead you're trying to do things yourself instead, then that's probably not the best idea. But if you've got no other option and no other access, then I think foam rolling is not a bad thing to do, and something, yes, that you might do after your hardest training sessions.
Yeah. And where I've seen people go wrong with that, whether it's clients or friends and family, but some people go too hard on the foam rolling and they end up like hurting themselves and getting sore from foam rolling. And it's like, yeah, that can happen. And so that's not good.
Totally. It's like any recovery strategy or any strategy that you're doing around training. You can do too much. You can wear too tight compression and wear it for too long and cause swelling in your feet. You can hop in an ice bath too long and get too cold. You can hop in a spa bath for too long and get too hot. And, people use some electrical stimulation sometimes and, things like complex. I mean, you can go too hard at too higher intensity and recovery stops being recovery and starts being a stress. And when you've moved from it being a nice recovery strategy to something that's adding increased stress, then it's not recovery. It's an additional part of your workout. It's not helping you recover.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a good message to send, especially with the foam rolling, that this should not be a workout. This should be making you feel better, not worse. And I think a lot of people have hopped on the foam roller and felt worse. So not quite using it properly. Well, interesting. So I also want to get into a different topic with you, Shona, of overtraining syndrome. And I think how much time do we have left? Because this is a big topic, but yeah, it's a really good one. So let's just start with you for our listeners who might not know what overtraining syndrome is. Can you give us a good overview and definition?
Yeah, so overtraining syndrome is essentially, we move from just fatigue to sort of functional overreaching to non-functional overreaching. And then right at the very, very end, when you're in a really bad place, is overtraining syndrome. And you essentially have to have a decrease in performance for several months. And that's usually accompanied by some mood disturbance. And then it usually needs to take you several months to actually, or more, to recover from. So it's one of those things that you just don't routinely see as part of your training program. Like it's something that's a real problem. But one of the other problems added to that is in the literature, there's almost no studies that really, 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 according to that definition, are demonstrating overtrained athletes. Because it's so hard to do that, to have performance measures at baseline, and then when they're really really fatigued and then when they've recovered. So we don't know a great deal about what to really look for with overtraining, because I actually don't think it happens that often. So when I was at the Institute of Sport, I think over 20 years, we probably saw about 3 overtrained athletes, so career-ending overtrained athletes. What we typically see first is people get injured first, and that's their body's way of saying, calm down, if you've done a bit too much. Or we see this idea of functional overreaching or non-functional overreaching, where they've just pushed themselves really hard and they just need a bit of recovery and they're actually going to be okay. This whole idea of real overtraining, career-ending stuff probably doesn't happen as much in elite athletes, because ideally you're working with really good coaches and you've got scientists and you pick it up quickly. We probably see it more in recreational type athletes who've got a lot of stress in their life, or they're not balancing their recovery. So one of the theories of overtraining is that you're not actually overtrained, you're just under-recovered. And with the athletes that I saw who were definitely in that I'm overtrained state, they were either trying to do shift work at night or they had significant stress in their life. So it was more this under-recovery rather than this excessive amount of training.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people, with similar degrees and stuff as you kind of say that too, of like, let's rename overtraining syndrome to under recovery syndrome, because that really explains it a bit more. But yeah, interesting to hear you say that not too many people, at least from an elite athlete standpoint, have had it, but it does make sense because you have so many red flags leading up to that point of I'm fatigued, I'm tired, I'm not performing as well, I'm not recovering well. And those should all be your signs of, hey, I need to slow down. I need to take some time off. I need to change something.
Yeah, very true. And I think also there may be times where, and it could be in the general population, but I do think there's this link between sort of this post-viral fatigue and overtraining. So, people may have, Epstein-Barr virus, or they may have some of these more chronic fatigue syndrome type issues going on, and kind of gets labelled as overtraining, but there's probably a medical reason for it. And sometimes that's not screened out really well. There may be people with some heart issues. And so I think there's this idea that we need to be a little bit careful around saying someone's overtrained before we've excluded everything else that could be a medical reason why they've got this overtraining syndrome. And we call it syndrome because we don't really know much about it, right? And so, it becomes a bit of a challenge in I think more the recreational athlete, as we've discussed. Elite athletes, there's something really going wrong if a coach and scientists around an athlete have let them get to the state where they're actually overtrained.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So for our recreational athletes who we want to give them a good heads up, what are some signs? We talked about decreased performance, so just not getting the same response out of your training, not hitting the marks, the times, the weights, despite putting in the same or more effort. But there's actual physiological markers too. I think heart rate changes over time. Are there a few other things that somebody might be able to identify, whether it's a true overtraining syndrome diagnosis or just that overreaching period? Are there a few indicators?
Yeah, I think the key ones are obviously performance and mood, and you need performance and mood disturbance for the definition, so to meet the criteria of whether you're overreached or overtrained. So it is really interesting that the difference between all of these different states of fatigue is how long it takes you to recover. So there's no information on, if you're overreached, your performance drops 15%, but if you're overtrained, it's 40%. We don't have any of that information. So it's really like, you came out of that fatigue hole in 3 weeks. You're probably just non-functionally overreached. And so it becomes really tricky to make good kind of comments on where people are, because you need to really see how long it takes them to come back. But I think there's things that that I would look at, and I think I'd look at their sleep as something that we often see goes wrong before people become excessively fatigued. What we do see in this is relate a little bit to mood, but if you've got a standard session that you might do, so every Wednesday you do this session and it takes you a lot longer to recover from that, then that you normally think, by Thursday morning I'm good to go. If Thursday morning you're not good to go, it may mean that you're not recovering well, and that can be a sign. We may also see some issues around your perception of effort. So again, you do this session on a Wednesday, and it's funny. You can have an RPE of 10, 20. You can be maxed out, and this can be your highest perceived effort that you can do. And you can feel kind of good doing that, or you can feel bad doing that, right? So I think this idea of your perception of effort, things just feel harder and they feel worse when you're doing them. That can also be a bit of a sign. But, there's some evidence that maybe, resting heart rate might be a little bit higher, but then it's also really challenging to work out, are you detrained or are you overtrained? Because you've probably had some time off. So it's messy. It's so messy.
It's so messy.
As a little quick story, as I said, my PhD was in overreaching, essentially. The university and my supervisor spent a lot of money looking at everything under the sun. We looked at stable isotope infusion, so, metabolism of carbohydrate. We looked at every hormone. We put people in a sleep lab. We did all kinds of things. The best predictor of how fatigued someone was and how recovered they were was their subjective ratings, so what they wrote down on a piece of paper. So I wasted a significant amount of money, but their perception of being tired and being sore. So when you've got people that are going to give you the truth and they're going to tell you how they really feel, that to me is the best indicator of whether someone's going into a bad place or not.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that must have been so frustrating for you.
I was like,
all this research.
I know, it was so funny. I was like, let's look at cortisol and testosterone, and let's look at all these immune markers, everything. No, just ask how they feel. That was the best predictor.
I totally believe it, though. It makes so much sense. It makes sense in my personal life and in, my research and my career field as well.
Yeah, listen to your body.
There's a lot to be said to that. Yeah, listen to your body. And how, again, it's not sexy, but
no, it's simple as what we all say. But people want a device that's going to tell them you're ready or you're not ready, or you're fatigued or you're not fatigued. And it's like, that, in yourself how you feel. You just got to listen. You just got to pay attention to it and act on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that brings up another. I'm telling you another story about my husband on this recording. Well, just yesterday, he went for a run and finished his run. It was an easy jog for him. It wasn't the heat, admittedly, but it was an easy jog and not a big deal. And he's an athletic man, 3 miles, moderate pace, and his watch tells him he needs 3 days to recover. He was like, what is this? Why do I need 3 days to recover? And he's not going to listen to it. And I was like, I don't know why it's saying that.
Yeah. And that's that's the issue that I have with some of these devices is, I trust, that they can measure sleep and wake. Okay. I trust that they can, measure their accelerometry and their speed and these kinds of things, heart rate. They probably measure, not naming devices, but many of them can do that relatively well. But then they get out of their lane and they put everything together to give you this figure. And I'm like, you don't tell us what it is. You don't tell us your algorithm. You don't tell us how you've calculated it. Why should I believe it? And that's when people, so if you can imagine being an Olympic athlete, you wake up in the morning of your final and you've got your watch telling you need 3 days to recover. Like disaster. And so, yeah, and we don't even know if that's true or not. And so that's where I think some of this orthosomnia too comes from with some of these devices, is you get this number that's telling you something and it's like, we don't even know if it's true. So I just think, look at the hard data that comes from them. And when they give you this generic figure or this generic score or this generic, you need 3 days to recover, take it with a grain of salt.
Yep. Yeah. He was looking to me as the expert to explain it to him. And I said, I don't know. Let's figure, you're fine. Just go, if you feel good tomorrow, go for a run tomorrow. So.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, this whole overtraining and overreaching thing, I don't know that I have a specific question for you on this, Shona, but I just want to share some of my experiences as a dietitian. I work with a lot of athletes who are definitely under recovering from that nutrition perspective, right? And so it's been interesting, like from a research standpoint, I've been working a lot with clients who resonate with having relative energy deficiency in sport or RED-S. And they also a lot of the symptoms, I would say, just overlap with overtraining. And then the type of person who might have RED-S is also the type of person who's more active and doing more physically and pushing their body and not recovering. And I've had a few clients over the years where I'm like, wait, is this, and I have ways to kind of, I just deal with the nutrition. I'm like, well, we got to deal with this no matter what, we got to get you fueling properly. But it is such a weird overlap of different like terminology. But I think again, this isn't really a question, but I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's under recovery. And the way you already explained it on this podcast of the pyramid, with nutrition being one of the base foundations, it's like if you aren't recovering and eating and fueling properly, you could easily fall in the trap of overtraining, overreaching, and or red S. One of those is going to happen.
Exactly. And the way I see it is it's a stress to the system that's an additional stress to the system. If you're not getting your adequate nutritional intake, you've got your training stress, you've got your nutritional stress. And if you're not, you're not providing the right recovery in the form of whatever that looks like, then, yeah, you certainly open yourself up to things going wrong. And whether, and the body, it's funny, it's, as it's really resilient, but only up to a point. So we can do a fair bit of damage for a reasonable amount of time before, the red light comes on and it's like, okay, now the body's saying, it's like when you don't sleep for a significant amount of time, you tend to get sick. And that's the body's way of sort of forcing us to pay attention and to slow down. And I think, reds and those kinds of things as well, it's a bit of a wake-up call, I think, to say something's not going well here and we need to correct that. And taking care of your nutritional recovery or your intake is one way to sort of manage some of that or get back from that sort of stressful situation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I just love going down that kind of checklist of, when something's going wrong, let me address my sleep, let me address my nutrition, let me address my mental recovery.
Yeah.
And then let me use some of these little modalities, massage, foam roll, something little, and to include probably from the nutrition side, supplements, those are the little things.
Yes, that's it. They're the icing on the cake. They're not the cake. The cake is, the good stuff, the sleep, the nutrition, the downtime.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, I have one final question. I'm embarrassed to ask it, but
go for it.
I'm embarrassed because I'm like, oh, it's probably a stupid question, but there's no stupid questions, right? People ask me questions all the time when it comes to food. So when we are let's leave professional athletes out of this because I think they're maybe in a different category. And let's go towards just somebody who's competitive, but still recreational, maybe a high school athlete, maybe a post-college athlete. Is there like a guide or a go-to for like just rest days? Like how many rest days should we take? And a difference between a rest day versus an active recovery day where we're getting on the bike, but for more of a, not pushing ourselves. Do you have any sort of guidance for that? Or is it listen to your body again?
Yeah, no, it is a really good question. And it is a little bit hard to answer. I guess it does depend on the sport to a certain extent. I mean, you look at most elite athletes, would have, and sorry, I know we're taking the general, that we're thinking about recreational, but if you start from an elite athlete point of view, most of them would have 1 to 2 days off per week. So they'd probably have a Sunday off, and then some of them would have like a afternoon off of a Wednesday or something like that, potentially. So 1.5, maybe 2 days off completely. So for individuals who are doing that much exercise and they're still taking that time away, I think that's important. So I think, yes, listen to your body. I think everyone should be aiming for at least 1 day off. If you're doing something like an active recovery day where you might just you look at the Tour de France, the guys ride on their days off, so, and it's not hard. And I think that's the thing, is it has to be a recovery ride rather than something that's too strenuous. So there's some cool work that's been done that's looked at coach's intention for the training week and what the athletes actually do. And it turns out that the hard days that the coach sets are never as hard. The athlete doesn't quite do them as hard, but the easy days the coach sets, the athletes never do as easy. And so I think this idea of kind of listening to your body, knowing when you need a rest, accepting that it's okay to have a rest and that you do need days off. And if you're doing something that's an activity, just making sure that it doesn't add any extra fatigue. to your day. So it's really one of those things that should be just light and easy and, just ticking the legs over if you're on the bike because you're just having fun. If it becomes not fun or hard, then, you're probably pushing it too hard. But I would say looking for at least one full day off, maybe up to 2 days if you're pretty serious. And then, even a third day off is not a problem. People need to remember, I think, that the adaptation, the benefits, the good stuff happens when you rest. If you're not resting enough because you're stressed or you're working lots or you're training early and you're not sleeping, then you may need the extra day because that's when the good stuff actually happens.
Mm-hmm. I love that. The good stuff happens when you rest and recover.
Yeah, that's why there's athletes that would love to train 24 hours a day to get the benefits, but it doesn't work that way. You just break down, and the recovery is needed to bring you back. And if you're doing a lot of breakdown, whatever that's from, training, stress, no sleep, then you're going to need more time to come back and just listening, as we say, I keep saying, listening to your body but accepting that it's okay to have days off. A lot of people do struggle with that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I truly hope that our listeners take that advice seriously and do that. And I'm glad that my train of thought has always been, at least one day off a week at least, and to plan that in, right? That's how we started this conversation. Actually, was plan that in.
Totally, we brought it back to the start. Yeah, it's important.
There we did.
If it's important, you plan it in. So
plan it. It's part of your training is to actually recover. So. Oh, beautiful. What a helpful conversation, Shona. This has just been so great to have you on. I do like to ask a few fun questions if you're willing to play along to wrap this up.
I like fun questions. If I can give you a fun answer.
I hope so too. This first question is my favorite. If there was one food you could eat every single day for the rest of your life and never get sick of it, what would it be?
It would have to be chocolate. Standard answer, but oh my gosh. Of every variety, white, dark, milk. Yeah.
Anything,
chocolate.
As long as it's chocolate.
As long as it's chocolatey, I'm up for it.
I love it. Beautiful. It's a good answer. The chocolate's up there for me too. What is your favorite sport to participate in yourself?
I used to do a lot of running and loved it, but now I've started doing CrossFit, which is hilarious because I never thought I'd say I'd been doing that, but I just love the social aspect. And so I've started doing lifting, which I think is important as we age to, protect those muscles. So I've been lifting weights, which is not something I thought I'd ever say in my life.
I love that. And it's a great community that they've built of motivating each other and a great community aspect. Awesome. What is your favorite sport to be a spectator of? Your favorite sport to watch?
Track cycling. In the flesh, track cycling. Just the speed they get to, how high the banks are, how close they get to each other, how they've got no brakes. Track cycling for me is the absolute thrill to watch.
Yeah, that's scary. I've never seen it in person. I've seen it on TV and you're just tense the whole time. It's rather scary to watch.
It wasn't until I got to watched a real event that I actually got real perspective on how high those banks are and what they're doing and how incredibly skilled they are and how brave they need to be. So,
yeah, amazing. And then final question, is there a female athlete, whether professional or in your personal life, that you just think is a role model and inspiring, doing a lot for female athletes across the globe? Who would you want to give a shout out to?
Oh, one of my absolute favourite athletes she's retired now, but she's regarded the best female track cyclist in the world ever. Anna Mears, Australian athlete. She had a serious crash before Beijing and probably should not be able to walk. Came back, won multiple gold medals. Yeah, she's commentated in Tokyo and she was just brilliant, super smart and just doing really great things in sport and in a lot of other areas. So, Anna Mears has always been a bit of a hero in my world. So Anna for me.
That's amazing. What a story. I'll have to look into her.
Yeah.
I track cycling, like I said, I haven't been following that sport much myself. So
no, it's a good
very, very cool.
She's an impressive individual.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shona. Again, we appreciate your time, your expertise. We'll include some of your publications and ways to contact you and things like that in our show notes, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, not a problem. No, thank you.
Like I said, you've had so much research in this area. So thank you for your time and take care.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for the great questions.
I really hope you enjoyed that episode, and thanks for listening. But before I let you go, I have free resources that you can have access to right away, right now, so that you can start fueling your body as a fierce, fit, and fueled female athlete. First, I have your Red S recovery race. If you've ever wondered if you might be struggling with Red S, curious to learn more, or know you have Red S and are looking to recover fast, then you can head to www.riseupnutritionrun.com/RedS and download the Red S Recovery Race. See how you place and figure out the next steps to recovery. Plus, while there, I have a few other great resources for you, including 3 nutrition secrets that every elite athlete swears by, and access to our private Facebook community, Female Athlete Nutrition. So again, to gain access to all of this, head to riseupnutritionrun.com/RedS. That's /REDS. And you can gain access and get the help you need fast. Too many girls and women and female athletes struggle with nutrition, but you don't have to any longer. Become fierce, fit, and fueled. Links in the show notes, and I'll see you next time.